everybody, welcome back to Serving Up Plumbing with David Butler. Today we're going to be talking about water heaters again, but specifically thermal expansion in water heaters and how to protect them from that. But first, please hit that subscribe button, let me have a thumbs up if you like this video, and let me know what you'd like to see in the future. Now let's talk about thermal expansion. We're going to be talking about a few different things where it comes to thermal expansion. First of all, what is thermal expansion? What causes thermal expansion? What do we need to do to protect against thermal expansion? All of these things. So, first, let's talk about thermal expansion itself. What is thermal expansion? Well, thermal expansion means when you add heat to air or water, it expands. The molecules actually grow and get larger apart. That means it takes up more space. And it can even build quite a bit of pressure up, believe it or not. So in a water heater, especially a gas water heater, but electric water heaters and gas water heaters both build up thermal expansion because we're heating water. The hotter the water gets, the more thermal expansion you have. Now, where does it go? Well, if you have no place for it to go, it's going to put that pressure on all of the parts in your water system. Not just hot, but also the cold water system. It can build up 10, 20, 30, I've even seen 50 PSI pressure additional on what the water system is from thermal expansion. And it can do a lot of damage to faucets, toilet parts, and especially water heaters. When do we have thermal expansion and when do we not? Well, we always have thermal expansion. The only thing is it building up or is it being able to be dissipated somehow? Well, if you don't have a closed system, and what do we mean by a closed system? Well, a closed system means water goes in, but it can't go back out. Most cities don't have check valves or anything like that in their water meters. So in the past, when we had thermal expansion, it would just build up in the system and push back into the city's water main. So it was kind of flowing in and out of the city's main and your house. So if the pressure was building up, it just pushed back into the city main and you had no thermal expansion buildup in your plumbing system. But today, in a lot of places, we have cities that put check valves in their meters to protect the water. We have pressure reducing valves we have to add because the water pressure is being increased all the time to support all the additional building we're doing. We have check valves that we put on water heaters because we have hot water recirculating systems that we add on. There could be an RPZ, reduced pressure zone principal backflow preventer on your home because maybe you're out in the country and you have an aerobic system or a septic system. Or some cities just require RPZs on all homes. Not very many, but it's becoming more and more. All of these things do what we call close the system. And if you close the system, that means when thermal expansion starts taking place, the pressure has nowhere to go but increasing stress on your plumbing fixtures and especially your water heater. How do we protect against this? Well, there's a few ways to do it, but the two primary ways are either an expansion tank, which is the best way, or there's a pressure relief type valve on a ball valve that bleeds off a little bit of pressure if there is increased thermal expansion. Some of the cities approve them, some don't. It's not quite as good as the expansion tank, and I prefer the expansion tank, but it is accepted by the International Plumbing Code. How do we use an expansion tank? Well, we install it on the cold water inlet of the water heater. And it has to be on the cold water inlet. These tanks aren't rated to be on the hot water outlet side, and it's not going to protect your system correctly if it's not on the cold water inlet. Therefore, as the water heats, there's thermal expansion. The expansion tank compensates for the thermal expansion, and you don't have any damage to your plumbing fixtures or your water heater. This is what a 2-gallon expansion tank looks like. It has 3/4 male inlet. It has an air valve on top of it, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. The air valve, you can just hook a tire pump up to it or a compressor. You have to be careful if you use a compressor. This can be installed vertical or horizontal, depending on the model. Some can only be installed vertical. You do have to make sure you leave access to your air valve. Now, what's the air valve for? Well, you have to take the pressure reading of what the pressure is on the house already, and that's the water pressure coming in from the city. Once you find what that water pressure is, you have to air up the expansion tank to match that water pressure. Because inside this expansion tank, there's actually a bladder, kind of like a balloon, but a lot stronger than a rubber balloon. So you air that bladder up. When the water starts expanding, it pushes back into this tank and equalizes out the pressure. So the expansion is compensated inside the tank rather than on your water heater and on all your plumbing fixtures. These tanks are sized based on the volume of hot water. Now, this standard tank will work, and again, it's a 2-gallon tank. It will work for a 50-gallon, 40-gallon, or 30-gallon, or anything smaller than that. When you get larger than 50 gallons, you're going to need a larger tank. In general, it's going to be a 4-gallon tank for 2 50-gallon heaters. And if you get larger than that, you just have to start sizing it based on the volume of hot water in your tank and in your whole system. And there are charts that you can figure that by. Residentially, 2-gallon tanks and 4-gallon tanks are pretty much all we ever have to use unless it's an extremely large house. How bad can thermal expansion get? Well, look at the pictures of this tank that we've had that we actually pulled out of a customer's home. You can actually see on top of it where the steel has actually bent the pipe connections in. They used to be straight, but the expansion got so strong that it bulged the tank and bent the top of the tank. And that was strictly by thermal expansion, an increase in the pressure from the water being heated. As I mentioned earlier, some cities have check valves in their meters. Certain cities, in at least the Dallas-Fort Worth area metroplex, and I'm sure across the country, require expansion tanks on all water heaters. But that's not the code so far. The code says if you have a closed system, you must install an expansion tank or expansion protection on your water heating system. Do you need an expansion tank on a tankless gas water heater or electric? Well, the manufacturers say, look at your local codes. It doesn't really need one by theory because with a tankless water heater, it's never a closed system. The only time the tankless burner is supposed to kick on is when you're running water, whether that's electric or gas. So if you're running water through, it can never build up pressure, right? But I'm assuming that the local codes that do require it are thinking, what if something malfunctions and the unit kicks on when you're not running water? Which we know things like that can happen. So there are small little baseball size expansion tanks that are allowed on tankless water heaters. And the reason they can be so small is because the tankless water heater only holds about 1 to 1.5 gallons of water at a time. So you've got a very small volume of hot water. Remember, the expansion tanks size are based on the volume of hot water in the entire hot water system. That's why we have the 2-gallon on the 50s and the 4-gallon when you get in multiple 50s or 100-gallon tank. A good rule of thumb is anytime you replace the water heater, replace the expansion tank. They are still tanks. They can leak. The only time I wouldn't recommend that is if it had been replaced recently. As far as brands go, most expansion tanks are equally good. I haven't seen one brand that's particularly better than others. Usually plumbers end up buying the brand that they have access to at their local plumbing supplier. If you have any doubt whether you have a closed system or not, your best bet is just install an expansion tank. It won't hurt anything and it'll definitely help if you have any kind of thermal expansion whatsoever. One last thing, let's expand a little bit, I see what I did there, on where do we install it? Normally this is going to be installed on the cold water inlet. Now, what if you have multiple tanks, 2 tanks? If the tanks are hooked up in parallel, which means that you split the water line evenly and it goes to both water heaters evenly, you're likely going to have to put a tank on each unit. Now, the reason I say that, in the North Texas area, they require that you cannot have a shutoff valve between the tank and the water heater tank. That means between the expansion tank and the water heater tank, it cannot have a shutoff valve. Now, in commercial plumbing, we used to do that all the time. We would always put shutoff valves between the tank and the water heater tank. But in residential, they want to make sure that you can't shut the tank off and not replace it. So they don't allow you to install a valve in the North Texas area between the tank and the water heater. If you have 2 50-gallon tanks, you may have to install 2. If they're installed in series, you can install 1 4-gallon tank at the beginning of the first water heater. As they flow into each tank, it will protect both tanks. A final note about installation. Even in the code, you guys that are about to take your plumbing test out there, this is one of the questions on your plumbing test in Texas. You have to support your expansion tank. That means you can't just screw it on top of the water heater and have it resting on top of the heater. This needs to be supported anchored on the wall. They make a lot of great brackets that you can actually mount to the wall, and this will mount too. It'll support the tank properly, and then you can run a pipe over from the tank to the water heater tank. Make sure you support your expansion tank properly. A lot of information about expansion tanks, huh? Most people don't realize how powerful thermal expansion is. But if you remember the picture of the water heater, it can really do a lot of damage. Not just to the water heater, but your entire plumbing system. Well, thanks for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. Hit that thumbs up if you like this video. If you have a comment to let me know something about your experiences with thermal expansion, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. And remember, always tell your friends, the Butler did it.